Most of us, all of us are a product of our background and our culture. Matter of fact, you and I had a discussion. I asked for your help. I did not grow up in an area or community where there were large Hispanic or even small Hispanic populations. I mean, it was just non-existent.
I was sort of raised in the Puerto Rican community at home.
4 more years. Pause. 4 more years.
What's up, North Carolina? Welcome back. Season 4, Episode 4 of Liberty Inc., your source for all things liberty in our great Tar Heel state. Today we are beginning our Candidating 2024 series. I'm going to try and get all of our candidates on over the course of the year with plenty of time leading up to the election so you can meet them, get to know them, see how you can support them. And we're excited tonight to start with 2 first-time candidates. We have Christopher Sessions, who is running to represent District 10 in the North Carolina Senate. And we have Matthew Kordon, who is running to represent as the Libertarian in the North Carolina House for District 11. I'm really excited for both of them. New, fresh faces, lots of good ideas, lots of good energy. As always, tough uphill battles, so they need your support. Tune in, see how you can help out. And then, as always, Dub and Groo talk sports. I will note on this one that I'm running like 8 or 9 days behind, so the sports talk is going to be a little dated, but you can check them to see how they do. We should be back on track by the week after this one, and I am really excited that a few people have responded to my call for help. I could still use assistance, especially with some of the video editing and the smaller clips and stuff, so if you'd like to get involved, send a note, communications@lpnc.org. Go ahead and hit those like and subscribe buttons if you haven't already. And otherwise, sit back and enjoy.
Hello, Libertarians. I'm Justin Hinckley, Libertarian Party of North Carolina's Second Amendment Liaison Coordinator. Today I'm here to talk to you about some of the fundamentals of firearm shooting. Today we're going to focus mainly on the pistol. Even though most of what we talk about today is applicable across all platforms, I want to focus in specifically on the pistol so that if I say some things that are not applicable across all things, you know I'm talking specifically about auto-loading handguns, also known as pistols. To start, I break my handgun shooting down, the fundamentals, into 4 main pieces, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're not going to go into a ton of detail because it turns out I could talk for a long time about someone's grip or trigger finger. So, with that, the four main fundamentals I want you to think about is your grip, your trigger control, your sights, and your posture. We can break these all down to those type of things because thematically, each one of them has a couple components that unify to act on or do a similar thing. So when we talk about our grip, what I'm talking about is both your firing hand and your support hand. And notice I have my gun here on a stand like this. The reason being is because I want to actually be able to show how someone makes a grip. So that when you are drawing a firearm from a holster or you're picking it up from a table, you're doing similar things. So boom, and then your support hand can come in and build a grip there as well. We're not going to go too much into detail here, but notice my grip looks pretty natural. A quick check for your grip is to simply look to see if the slide of your gun is pointed more or less straight down your arm. And this might be kind of difficult to explain on the video, but think of it like this. This looks good, this does not. If my gun is pointing into the palm of my hand, likewise, if my gun is pointed into the knuckle of my thumb, this is not right. So what I want is something pointing down my arm. And the reason the grip is so important for us is because the grip is our foundation in shooting. And when I say that, I mean literally a foundation. When you're building a house and your foundation is off, that means everything in the house is going to be off. And if you want to fix it without actually fixing the foundation, you actually need to fix so many other things just to get to where you would be if your foundation was proper to begin with. So if we build our foundation properly here, it means we don't have to spend as much time compensating here or with our stance in some way. So with that, that's our grip, okay? So first part is our grip. This is by far the most fundamental and most important aspect of our shooting. Second is going to be our trigger control. Now, with our trigger control, this is also hugely important, not quite as much as the grip. It could be considered to be part of the grip because it's one of your fingers. Anyway, don't need to worry about that right now. Your trigger finger is very important because as you go to pull the trigger, your hand and your fingers, your knuckles, all of these muscles in your body around the bones and the ligaments and everything are flexing. And so as I go to pull the trigger, let's just go ahead and make sure, whoops. I'm in a hurry, okay, I forgot to clear my firearm before I came out. Alright, so, what was I doing now? Oh yeah, trigger finger. So, as I go to pull the trigger finger, especially for people who've never fired a gun before, you can look at your hand and you can see the metatarsals in your hand actually flexing, and you can see different bones and ligaments moving and flexing and straining. You can even sometimes see your wrist lock up or something. And the idea with the trigger finger is we want one thing moving in our hand when we're pulling the trigger finger, and that's this. And if we could get it to the point where literally just this moved and nothing else in our hand moved to include the other joints of our finger, then that would be ideal, because all we're trying to do is move this trigger with as little muscle movement as possible. So as you can see, we're here. What that means with that as well, when we go to reset the trigger, notice I don't come off my trigger. Idea there being minimize movement. And you'll notice that as we talk about everything, we're trying to minimize movement as much as possible, because movement introduces inconsistency. And the key to shooting well, especially when you're new and you're not sure what you're supposed to be doing all the time, is consistency. Because when you are a consistent shooter and you do the same thing every time, and then you go to do it again and it's the same thing every time, then you can diagnose problems more specifically and easier. Because you'll see that, all right, I came up, I went to shoot, bang, ooh, that didn't feel right. Why didn't that feel right? Well, what I did that time was I came out to the end of my grip and then I waited a second and then I pull the trigger. Whereas normally I come up and I pull the trigger as soon as I get it, whatever, you know? But nonetheless, as you go through your training, if you are trained at a baseline to be consistent, then you'll be able to control yourself better. And as you want to change things, you will be able to change them and do so consistently, because you're used to introducing a move and then doing that move the same time every time. Anyway, so we've gone through grip, we've gone through trigger control. Let's now talk about our sights. All right, our sights are incredibly important, because if our sights are wrong, then we're not actually going to hit the target. So no matter how well we apply our grip, no matter how well we apply our trigger finger, our trigger control, it doesn't matter if our sights are off, because we're going to be actually aiming at the wrong thing. So with that, we have sight alignment and sight picture. Sight alignment is the relationship between the the rear sight and the front sight. So how you line these up. Now, because of the numbers of different sights that are on the market, I can't say universally all sights are supposed to be lined up this way. However, most sights, especially stock sights on a handgun, most sights are designed so that the rear sight and the front sight can be lined up and meshed together, and you form a single line across the top with the front sight inside the notch of the rear sight. And you can make it completely level, and that's the height that it's supposed to be at. The issue with a lot of different sights is that the front sight and the rear sight, it's imperfect as far as the width, so you need to just make sure it's kind of evenly lined up. Whatever amount of space is to the left of the front sight inside this aperture, there's the same amount of space on the right. If you have a sight that somehow with your eyes fits perfectly in that notch, then you are good to go. Like, make sure there's no daylight on either side of your front sight, and then you'll be able to shoot. Now, finally, we have our posture. Our posture is not specifically related to how we're gripping and employing the gun, but it influences how we can move and employ our body. One way to think about shooting is that shooting is a competitive and athletic endeavor. All right, we are not standing here like stood up, square shoulder, like square block, rigid block. Okay, we want to stay in a somewhat dynamic and bouncy and movable spot. So with that, thinking about our grip, we have our grip, right? We're here, boom. So everything else should be lined up in such a way as to employ the handgun with the grip we have. So that means my wrists are going to be pretty much locked. Now I want them engaged. I don't need to like be trying to squeeze my wrists as hard as they can. I just need them to be rigid, especially if I have a smaller gun or a Glock. Glocks are known to be kind of snappy, especially once you start chopping inches off the barrel. So when you're out here, if you're not holding your wrists with some rigidity, you're going to notice your gun might start to snap. And that's going to cause issues, not just with your ability to fire follow-up shots, but some people who don't do it, what they allow the gun to do unintentionally is the gun follows the ejection pattern of the piece of brass being thrown from the gun, so that as the brass is being thrown out, the slide cycles and catches the brass inside the gun, and now you have a malfunction that you have to clear. So with that, rigid wrists, elbows are similar. They should be almost locked out, but not quite. Think about it in a way of like, if I had to be up here and shooting for a while, would I rather have my wrists locked, or would I rather have a slight bend in them, or would I rather be back here? You'd rather be back here, honestly, if you're going to be out here for a while, but you can't shoot appropriately that way because your wrists are bent and you're not going to be able to employ your sights properly, and you're going to hit yourself in the face with the slide. Anyway, so we push out, we get to a nice comfortable spot where I feel like I can shoot here for a good long while, and my elbows have just a slight bend in them. Now with my shoulders, so from here out, we're talking about the trunk of your body, your shoulders, your chest, your abdomen, your hips. Those should all be facing square to the target. Okay, you shouldn't be bladed like this. Maybe a slight twist depending on how your feet are, which we'll talk about in a second. But for the most part, you should be squared to the target. All right, you should be able to look. All right, my shoulders square to the target, chest, stomach, hips, all square to the target. Even if my feet aren't exactly the same space, my hips should be turned so that I'm still facing the target. But in regards to my shoulders, so my shoulders are square to the target. Now what do I want to do with my shoulders? Do I want them back? Do I want them forward? Do I want them neutral? Well, neutral is okay, but you can also roll them forward if you'd like. They don't need to be shrugged. You're just going to roll them forward a little bit, so when you go to shoot, you have a little bit more oomph behind your arms, a little bit more bulk in your body behind it, so that this right here, this can help absorb some of the recoil, especially if you're a smaller person. Using every ounce of your body that you can to help absorb recoil is going to pay dividends for you. You might notice as you're shooting, though, that this can get tiring after a while, so you might end up relaxing your shoulders. That's okay. The main thing is you don't want your shoulders way up here, and you don't want your shoulders just totally gone from the picture. Your shoulders should also be engaged. You should have even try flexing your shoulders a couple times just to make sure, like, I know what my shoulders being engaged feels like. So with that, your chest. So we'll kind of talk about chest and hips similarly, because your chest wants to be a little bit forward, and the easiest way to do that is to think about your hips as a hinge point and then lean your chest forward from your hips. And the way to know you're doing this right is if it feels like you're sticking your butt out. Like if you come here and I lean my chest forward and my butt goes out a little bit, that's generally what you want. Now you don't need to exaggerate this a lot. This is again just to help get a little more of your weight behind the gun, so that when it comes time to start shooting, you can go a lot faster because your whole body is absorbing the recoil instead of just your hands, your wrists, or your arms. And once we start moving and shooting, this also pays dividends, because if you're kind of in this little bit of a crouch, a fighting stance, you're able to move more than if you were just standing like this, or if I was standing like this, bladed to the target. So the idea is you want to facilitate movement as well as absorb the recoil of the shooting. With that, we come back a little bit more. So my knees are going to have a little bounce in them. They're kind of going to be like my elbows. I don't want them locked out. I don't need to do a squat, but I want to have a little bit of bounce in my knees, again, for movement, but also we think of our joints as springs. Having a little bit of engagement in the springs is best. Your feet can either be shoulder width apart, or you can take your strong hand foot, so for me that'd be my right foot, and just slide it back about half a foot. So you don't need to come all the way back into some far spread out stance, because we're not necessarily trying to fight someone tackling us, but we do want to have the ability that if we have someone pushing us in the chest, aka the recoil of the gun, we are able to absorb that. So the foot being half back, that's just what that is. It just provides you a little bit more stable of a base. The reason I tell people shoulder width apart is because you can always do shoulder width apart the same way. It's very consistent. You look down at your feet, you say, look, they're the same forward and backward, and they're my normal shoulder width apart distance. So that way I can do this every single time. Because remember, we talked about is consistency. I want to have the same grip every time. I want to have the same support hand grip every time. I want to bring my gun out the same way every time. I want to have my finger on the trigger the same way every time. I want to have my posture the same way every time. That's whether it's my shoulders being rolled forward or keeping them a little bit relaxed but engaged, keeping my chest, the abdomen, and my hips facing the target, keeping my feet either shoulder width apart, one with a half step back maybe. I want to be able to line the sights the way I normally do. Okay, I got my dot there, similar amounts of space on each side. Boom. And we're gonna have to edit this in because I forgot about the other part of my sights. So sight alignment is the relationship of your front sight and your rear sight to each other. Sight picture is the relationship of your sights to the target. So sight picture is essentially your sight alignment as it relates to the target. The main thing about this is knowing what kind of sights you have, so that when I come up and I put my front sight on the target, I know, am I supposed to cover the spot I'm trying to hit with my target? Or, yeah, am I trying to cover the spot I'm trying to hit with my sights? Or should I be just below it? So, for instance, I have aftermarket sights, so I cover the target with my sights currently. But the factory Glock sights are actually what's called pumpkin on the fence, which is where you put your sight just below where you want to hit, the idea being that as you shoot, you can see the impacts on your target because the sights aren't covering the target. Different schools of thought, no big deal, just kind of figure out which one your sights are supposed to be, and part of that is shooting it and figuring it out for yourself. And then second with that is, with our sight picture, we want the front sight to generally be clear when we're pulling the trigger, and the target and the rear sight should be fuzzy. You should mostly get used to being able to transition your focus between all three of them, because think about it, if I'm shooting and I'm really engaged on shooting properly fundamentally, I've got my front sight clear, bang, 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 but now my target is blurry, so how many times do I need to shoot my target before I need to stop shooting my target? But that relies simply on being able to transition from front sight, target, front sight, target. And I should be able to transition relatively seamlessly so that as I'm shooting, I can take pauses in my shooting to reassess if my target still needs shooting. So I can be like, bang, 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 oh, reassess, finger off the trigger, oh, my target's down. Okay, my target's going to the ground. He's not really moving now. Okay, now I can assess because I've gotten used to being able to transition my eyes from the target to the sight to the target to the sight. And finally, this isn't necessarily part of your sight picture. This is a safety consideration. Part of your sight picture should be clearing things that are not things you want to shoot at when you're about to fire your gun. So if I come up and I go to shoot someone, and look, he's in a crowd of people that aren't trying to shoot me, maybe I don't need to shoot that guy right now. Anyway, that's another aspect for another story. So that's the basic. Those are the four basics that I cover when I cover the basic fundamentals of shooting, particularly handguns. So you have your grip, that's your foundation for shooting. You have your trigger control, which is going to be the thing that pays dividends the most when you practice. And then you have your sights, finally your posture. So grip, trigger, sights, posture. Practice those four elements, learn about those four elements. We're going to talk more about that in the future. We're going to talk details really in the grip. The grip is one of the ones that I could talk the longest about, so that's why I'll create a whole separate video just for grip. But with that, once we go into that, I'm going to talk more about dry fire as well, which is something all of you can do right now, wherever you're at, well, potentially. But you can do it at home. You can do dry fire 5 minutes a day at home. And all dry fire is pretty much what you've seen me do while I'm doing this video, right? I check my gun to make sure it's unloaded. I have an area that I can point a gun at that's relatively safe, and I say relatively safe because if we're at home, most of us don't have berms in our backyard that we can point at, that if we accidentally did fire a round, it would catch the round. But we want to point somewhere where we know there aren't people. So we find a safe space in our house. I'd unload a gun, a safe space, maybe a blank wall or a wall with a small target, and I'm just practicing, I'm pointing. All right, what do I want to do now? I want to practice my trigger control. Okay, boom. Okay, now I want to practice building my two-handed grip. Okay. Okay, well now I want to work on presenting my actual firearm and getting that sight alignment and sight picture. Okay, well now I kind of want to put them all together, and I want to draw and fire my gun, dry fire, so that I'm practicing what I might be doing in the streets. Okay, cool, so that's dry fire, that's all it is. And the great thing about dry fire is you don't need to do anything crazy with it in order for you to see huge dividends being paid. Especially when you're new, especially when you're not used to this action in your hand. Once you start to learn the trigger, you'll notice that all the different nuances of when you bring the gun up, maybe you're tilting the gun a little as you squeeze your grip. Maybe you're seeing some of the ligaments in the back part of your thumb tightening, all these different things. And so your body is learning to absorb that stuff, but also your muscles are learning to act slightly more independently than they're used to, because they're not used to doing this. When do we ever do this? Not really ever. So dry fire, huge dividends to pay. This is the basics of our fundamentals of shooting. As always, we always want to apply the safety rules at all times when we're doing these different things, okay? So we want to keep our finger off the trigger when we're not intending to fire. With dry fire, we get it. We're not intending to fire, but anyway. Keep the finger straight on the trigger, and more importantly, we don't want to point our guns at anything we don't intend to shoot. Again, with the dry fire aspect, one of the rules that I'm kind of playing with that I think you guys saw in the last video is the idea of knowing your firearm's condition and treating it appropriately to the condition it's in at all times. And that's kind of accounting for dry fire, right? Because if I'm doing this and I am dry firing, but rule 1 is treat every gun as if it were loaded, well then I've kind of just broken the rule, right? Because I'm not supposed to dry fire with this gun. Because dry fire is technically verboten. Anyway, that has been our fundamentals class for the day. I hope you guys get something out of this. I hope you guys start doing some dry firing, some more practice, training with your firearms. It's fun to shoot them, but it's more fun to train and to see how much more deadly you can become with each firearm as you go through training. With that, have a good one, guys.
What's up, North Carolina? Thank you for joining us for our special guests for episode 4 of season 4 of Liberty Inc., your source for all things Liberty in our great Tar Heel state. I'm really excited today. We are jumping in to our candidating series for 2024. We have a ton of candidates, maybe 50 by July, when we have an opportunity for a couple more to file. And these are my first two first-time candidates, two I'm very excited about, with big ideas and lots of energy, and we need lots and lots of that, more and more and more. So I'm going to let them both introduce themselves, and we'll take it from there. Let's start with you, Matthew.
Hi, I'm Matthew Kordon. I might be one of the youngest people to be running in the House seat for my district, for probably my district at any point in time, but maybe this whole region of Wake County. I've been a resident of Raleigh in the general area for quite some time, since I was starting education, really, since first grade. And I grew to love this place quite a lot. I very briefly moved away to live in Florida to go spend time with family during COVID, which was nice to get away from the COVID restrictions, I'll say. But I realized that I really loved this place. And so I knew I had to come back and continue living here, try to put down some roots. I care about a lot of things. Environmentalism, the issues that a lot of other people my age care about indeed. And of course, libertarianism.
What's your primary issue?
I'd say that'd be good governance, which to me means sort of two different things. It means running the government very well, which could be being extremely cost effective in a caring sort of way, or say reforms. And I have all kinds, whether it's ranked choice voting, also known as instant runoff, term limits, inability to recall candidates, the way that they're funded and how they operate in the House, the transparency of the General Assembly. And I can go on, as well as moving power towards the local government sometimes, where I feel like it shouldn't be in the state government.
And you are running for North Carolina House 11, correct? And you
That's
have,
right.
I believe, a Democrat and a Republican, and the Democrat is the incumbent.
That's right.
All right. And what about you, Chris?
Yes, Chris Sessions. I'm running for Senate District 10, which consists of Johnston County. I've been a Libertarian since 2002, actually been voting Libertarian longer than that. You asked what brought me to the party. Showing a little bit of my age, actually found out about the Libertarian Party from Rock the Vote on MTV back in the 90s.
You have the right to vote. Use it or lose it. Rock the vote.
And voted for Harry Brown. So I've been doing this for a while. This is my first time running, though. As far as issues go, I have my top three. First one is drug decriminalization, legalization, particularly medical marijuana. I'm a veteran. I've seen the enormous.
Thank you for your service.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome. But just life-changing effects I've seen from people giving up opioids and other drugs and starting using marijuana is something. The last poll that I've seen, 82% of North Carolina supports, 57% support recreational. So, you know, those are my big issues, plus drugs in general. We own our body, not the government. We should be allowed to put in it to it what we want. My second thing is the emergency powers of the governor. We need to limit that. I would introduce a bill immediately to change the Constitution of North Carolina to make it where the legislature, once they can meet, they have to vote to grant those authorities or not. Whether or not you agree with the lockdowns or not, they shouldn't be one person deciding what to do, especially when he grants himself the power, basically making himself a dictator. My third issue would be, sorry, catching my thoughts, is occupational licensing. Just trying to make it easier for people to work, start businesses. We have the eighth worst occupational licensing requirements in America.
978.
What's that?
978 occupational licenses requirements in North Carolina.
Oh yeah, it's ridiculous. A floor sander needs a license in North Carolina. You need 300 hours to braid hair. One of only 15 states that require nurses to have a doctor's supervision to do basically anything. And my, wait, that was my top three. A few other things that just, I support Mike Ross. Some of the things he's talking about is taxation, make it simpler, do away with some of the layers. And then his position on school choice, I agree with him there. Let's get the government out of it. Let's make real school choice, not a version where the government just takes over the private schools.
And that's what they're looking for. So let me run with that, Chris, because you hit a couple of, I think, top of mind issues for people in North Carolina. And I think it's important as libertarians to be able, we're very good at sort of explaining the end results, but we don't explain how to get there. And it's not that we don't know how to get there. It's that we want to talk like we're honestly we're dreaming to an extent, because it's like we're in this semi-dystopian hellscape politically where the Republicans and Democrats dominate everything. I don't know if you saw, but the Democrats are going to move up the deadline from August to the end of April for when localities have to submit their polling places for the election, which will allow them to put all their polling places in Democrat strongholds, because there's a new law coming, I guess, after April that will require a more balanced placing of polling places. I don't exactly understand the strategic move in moving it up, but it's very favorable to the Democrats. And then the Republicans just draw gerrymandered lines that help them because they're in charge, and that's where we sit. And so we're like, yeah, imagine a world without a government. And it's, well, there's an off ramp to get there. So let's talk occupational licensing for a minute, because I think this is one of the most misunderstood and most important issues, along with zoning laws. Right now in North Carolina, we have, I hate the word crisis, but we have a housing situation. There is a lack of housing that is affordable to a number of classes in a lot of North Carolina. We have, I don't want to say unemployment, but underemployment problems. We have massive inflation, and we have transportation and gridlock issues that are growing all over the state. If people could just start businesses right near where they live, you immediately take care of 70% of those. I mean, in a year, those are no longer issues. What is it that drew you to the problems of restrictive occupational licensing rules? Because there's my spiel. It's one of the things that frustrates me.
So, hearing the party talk about it, kind of made me aware of the issue. What kind of drew me to it, actually, the local paper, the Johnstonian, started running articles about the nursing not being able to basically do their job without doctor's oversight, and then paralegals being restricted on what kind of legal advice they can give. So it kind of brought it home to me and made me concentrate on that issue. When I first started running, it wasn't even in my top fives. But then when I started reading these news articles and started investigating more and finding out how bad we are as North Carolina, and how, like you mentioned, 900 and something, occupations that require licensing. So it was just that digging in after starting to run and noticing these issues that I wanted to move that up and make it one of my top priorities.
You want to follow up on that one, Matthew? Any thoughts on occupational licensing?
Indeed. So I was looking into the bills that have been written in the last 2 years by my Democrat opponent, the incumbent, and one of which was an occupational license update that made it worse. There must have been some nice aspects to it, because I was talking with somebody from the John Locke Foundation who quite liked the bill, which really surprised me, because when I was reading it beforehand, all I really noticed was that it made it more restrictive, reducing how many nurses there could be, and raising the fees for becoming a nurse, which might have been inspired by inflation. I don't know, but the nature of bigger fees, or just big fees in general when it comes to these occupational licenses, is it occurred to me recently, sometimes the state does that as a way to have an additional sizable revenue stream, that in contrast to the federal government, a surprising amount of their money comes from these sorts of nickel and diming fees, and they might seem small to a layman, but these things, they can have a domino effect on the individual who is going through the process and has to be surprised with the fact that, to become a nurse here, you have to pay this much in addition. And who knows what that can do to the economy in the long run.
And you talked about good governance, so I want to get into that more in a minute, but I think there is a parallel between getting rid of restrictive occupational licensing laws and actual good governance, because when you have occupational licensing, what you really do is sort of remove accountability and liability from the people who have it. Like, okay, I got this license, I don't need to do more. There's no incentive to be better. I've met this sort of baseline. So I know, Matthew, education is an issue that you're very passionate about, and you're exploring all sorts of options. How much do you see opportunity to just allow people to become teachers because they want to be teachers, not because they've gone through. This is something that drives me insane. Is like you have to go through 4 years of college, 5 years, meet all these certification requirements, and then teach exactly what we said, or else you can't go be a teacher and make this paltry $26,000 a year.
Well, yeah, you have a good point, especially in the way that for what teachers get paid and for how badly we need them, we sure do require a lot out of them. And I have found ever since I graduated from college and during college as well that we now live in an age where there's so much learning that you can do on your own, and that if a person is passionate enough, that likely they have access to things like the internet or the library or what have you that can really truly teach them so much. Like we're so very privileged, I feel, in this day and age. And in that way, I think people don't appreciate the capacity for people to be teachers, even if they don't have a full 4-year degree. That's really interesting, though. I hadn't thought of that aspect of the issue, but I have in the past talked about and thought about the need for there to be lower requirements, especially when it comes to the government is hiring people to fill roles. We need to be that role model for the economy to show. No, actually, you don't need to have a PhD and a bachelor's to get a fairly easy job. And that there are all kinds of like innovative, interesting people.
I would add really quickly that having those things doesn't mean you're good at that job either.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Yeah, and there's definitely many kinds of ways to evaluate the metrics of somebody. When I did an interview for the company I'm hired by at Dell Technologies, they my other job when I'm not campaigning, of course, they had me go through a very different interviewing process than most. And it was very much about like doing a project as opposed to answering questions, because at the time I wasn't very good at that sort of thing. So it was a nice opportunity that I found in the reading online ads that I was like, this is very different. And then I tried it and it turns out I really excelled at that. So some people, when they go through the education system or say an interview, in this case, like they're not the best at ordinary methods, one size fits all things, but that they're really good at other such things. And that's why if we open our mind to more than just on a piece of paper, it says all of your accomplishments and your education, but that we examine people as people and really try to look into other ways of interviewing. Because I know that with interviewing, there often is so many applicants. I hear people say they can only spend 5 seconds looking at an interview. But something has to give, certainly. And I also feel that oftentimes our lived experiences are very valuable. And I think that's why a lot of people have the courage to decide that they want to get into homeschooling, for example.
We homeschool. We like it. Quick tip on an interview. So I interview people a lot and I try to figure out how to filter through them. When I get someone to the interview point, I ask, so tell me about my company. And if they can't do it, I just end the interview right there. Like you didn't have the interest to go do a little bit of research, then you don't really want the job. You're just, not to get too sidetracked. So Chris, I want to follow up. So you mentioned limiting the governor's emergency authority as one of your top priorities. And I second that wholeheartedly. I mean, I'd take away almost all the governor's authority, period. But emergency authority is this crazy situation where if you give someone power in a quote unquote emergency situation, they will create an emergency situation for that power. I would like to get your thoughts following on the education topic of Roy Cooper's recent declaration. I don't think it's anything official, but setting the stage that we are in an education emergency.
That's the first I heard of that, but I think
that's a few weeks ago.
It's ridiculous. We spend more money on education than any other thing in this state. $13,000 per pupil. That's plenty of money to educate a child. The private sector does it for cheaper and has better results. So they call that an emergency. You know, if we're having an emergency spending that much, then we need to relook the whole system, because it's not working if this is an emergency. And we need to just relook how we're educating our children and, look at the private sector and find better ways to do it.
Well, and then we get in this crazy scenario where, like you said, Chris, I think it's either 12,900 or 13,900. I looked that up for Mike. I forget exactly which one, but per student, we're spending 13 billion, 12.5 billion, something like that. I mean, it's a huge amount of money. I should have the numbers up in front of me. I don't remember them. Then you look at where it's going and what it's supposedly doing, and we've got 40% of students reading on grade level at third grade. And that's the key one, because you learn to read before third, you learn from reading after. So if you're not there at third grade, your odds of success go way down. And we're being told by the Democrats that, well, we just need to throw more money at the problem. But the Republicans really aren't better, because they're just, all they do is scream, well, it's woke, 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 and we hate teachers. I mean, it's basically the message. I'm being hyperbolic, but it's like, we're going to be enemies of education unless you believe exactly what we say. And in particular, in light of, Matthew, your drive for good governance, I'd love to hear both of you sort of talk about ways we could immediately start to fix the education system.
Mm-hmm. And if I may, I'd like to comment real quick about reducing power from the governor. It just so happens some of my goals are similar. I will admit I haven't really figured out what exactly I would take from the governor, but I just have a more broad goal in mind of evaluating what are the powers of the governor, especially emergency powers. I agree with that that the governor should absolutely be very restrictive with what they can do for emergencies. What comes to mind to me is like we're being invaded by an army, or like there's a weather emergency that's extreme. Those are real emergencies to me that makes sense. But in a lot of ways, like what happened during the COVID pandemic was what really
terrifying.
Yeah, what really motivated me to see that like taking away our rights and that sort of thing, it goes on and in big ways, and it can happen every decade. There's something like it. It feels like it was a powerful experience to go through and to come out of. And so I'm with you on that. Just wanted to say. So your question was what again? I'm sorry.
So my question was specifically, and for both of you, in the good governance vein, and looking at where we are education wise, how can we start to fix the problem? But I actually think what you just brought up is very relevant, and where the emergency powers tie in, because while poor education policy and a fight for power over what we indoctrinate our children into, as opposed to actually trying to teach them, I think is the root of our education problems. The COVID situation was like throwing jet fuel on an already significant fire, and it has set a lot of kids back very far socially and learning wise. So how do we fix it? How do we make our education system work again?
It helps that people have been moving to alternatives so much here in North Carolina. I already mentioned homeschooling, but it's worth noting that homeschooling is a very huge percent of people in our state does it. We're the state with the most out of all 50 states. And I read that a few weeks ago, and I was kind of shocked by that, because I didn't quite realize it was that big of a grassroots movement here. But I actually I had additional education that was homeschooling. And so I learned from that it can be a wonderful, good thing, that if somebody who is as ordinary as my mom can do a good job at it, then it helped me to see how valuable the different kinds of education are. Got me interested in that at a young age, and not just that, but of course private schools and so forth as well. I think that's unfortunately not a big solution to the problem, because it will just mean those who want to leave public education, which are many but not percentage-wise huge, can say, actually, I don't want to meet online. I don't want to do Zoom calls where I or my kid learns half as much. I want to be in person. It's like to them, especially because if you recall, the kids were not anywhere near as affected by the death rates of COVID. So I was like, that on top of everything else.
In North Carolina, that's how many died from COVID. 31.
So, yep. And so so like it makes so much sense. There's like, if the people they say they want to leave public education. They want to go and do it, be educated some other way, and that I really I want to foster that kind of mentality of think critically about like how should your kids be educated. It's the next generation. We should very much care about this, and that it's very important that there's a cultural movement, like a bottom up movement, for people to want to leave public education and to see that the alternatives are great. I think in that regard, likewise, that the way we legislate around the different kinds of education is that the alternatives need to have a fair opportunity to compete with public education at a minimum. I know that's certainly some libertarians would want to quickly shrink or completely abolish public education. I respect that, but certainly we can't allow the alternatives to languish. I mean,
Yeah, and that's fair. I mean, I would get rid of public education, but I think within libertarianism, there's a range from sort of completely abolish public schools to school choice, and within that range, you stay legit. What about you, Chris? What's the first thing you would do?
So I would get rid of the testing, the regulatory requirements for the school choice program, and let the free market come up with the best way to educate children. Because what we're doing now, little history lesson, we do the Prussian model. You know, we follow a model
To train
from a country
soldiers.
that doesn't even exist anymore. And that's what the public education was for, to make good citizens and good soldiers. It had nothing to do with actually educating the children. They wanted good workers, good citizens, and good soldiers. And we're still 200 years later following the same system. So I would do the school choice where let somebody come up with the best way to educate their children and get the government out of the way, and let them, you know, if this model works for your child, great, do it. But 200 years later, I'm sure that we can unleash some, you know, very talented people that can come up with some very great ways to educate children. And another thing is, as far as my where I think I think it's Why We Learn, the podcast. Mike Ross was just on it, was excellent, broke it down, spent like an hour and a half breaking this issue down. But basically comes down to give parents control, give them the vouchers, and then let them choose how they want to educate their children.
And to be clear, and this is important because I worked with Mike on his education policy. It's not vouchers, it's just an equal division of the money. The problem with vouchers is they come with strings attached. So you just have to be real careful because it is actually a legal definition. But yes, your assessment is spot on. Divide the money up and let parents spend it on education, and force the market to come up with innovative solutions to better educate kids.
Mm-hmm. I had more to say about the topic that I remembered, may I?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I was thinking about how I was worried my answer might have sounded a little bit too big government in the sense of like, oh yeah, we should just fund public education and fund the other thing.
I didn't take it that way, for the record.
You never know who's listening though, so
yeah, that's fair.
So anyway, it's kind of the opposite is also true. If you don't do a whole lot for the other kinds of education, but you defund public education in the sense of cutting the waste and humbling what it is all about. There's a lot of and a big push for more mental health coaches in schools, that they're increasing the ratio of them in students, so that there's one for a small number of students now, or at least that's the way that it's heading. So that's one way that schooling can be more focused on actual schooling, because of course mental health, though it is very important, I care about such things. I went through a time of depression in my own life. That is not really the objective of a school to me. And also I think there needs to be less uniformity. And unfortunately, this would mean amending the state constitution, because the state constitution is very clear and extremely explicit about how every
It is,
school in
and
the state has to
Mike
be
talks about that
extremely
a whole lot.
uniform. Yeah,
Keep going, not to interrupt, agreeing with you.
like it has to be like exactly the same. And I just think that's the wrong approach. I made a tweet once recently that I feel like funding should be mostly at the local level. So what that would mean for me is that I would want to gradually reduce spending at the state level, but also in such a way that I really encourage local governments, cities, school districts to like kind of pick up some of the slack. That I wouldn't like literally just like defund and then say nothing. Um, uh, because and I think the overall like impact of that is that there'd be a lot more democracy about this district over here is relatively well funded by the national average, and then this one is less so because the people don't want that there. Like they um, and if it was very much decentralized in that way, then there'd be differences that are very good about say if this another pandemic comes along and this school district here is very authoritarian and things like this. The kids have to wear 2 masks, not 1. They have like the kid has to be entirely online or what have you. Then another school district just down the block and be like, no, we're not going to do things that way because that's just not how we feel here. And I really like that because to me it's liberty in a way that we all have the freedom to choose, but also that it appeases the demographics that are different. But also that I think that everyone has different ideas about education, about how much should be funded and how to go about it, because it is a very complex subject. And if you're a voter, you must be rather anxious to hear people like myself and especially Democrats and Republicans like talk like when they take power, where everything's going to be different, we're going to do this and that, and when we need more religion in schools or we need no religion in schools, whatever it is, it would for me personally, like when I was a voter, it would be a sigh of relief. It's like, oh, okay, so it's more my community. I can go to my neighbors and we can have a chat about it instead of some bigwig far away from me is making all the choices about what my kids will learn and experience and what their formative years will be like.
I think you both actually raise an interesting point too, in that we think about education right now very much a consequence of the paradigm we're under with the 2-party system, but it's always which way is right, which way do we force on people, and then we stop thinking about the outcomes. So what's the point of an education? It's to create a person who's well prepared to go into the world. So why don't we teach them how to do taxes, or why the Federal Reserve is evil, which I would put into my coursework, or how to balance a budget or start a business or sail a boat or fix a stove. I mean, there's a million things, and instead it's like, well, no, you need to take Calc 2 to graduate at this level, and you will do this, and it is that uniformity you talk about is it's counterproductive. It's that one size fits all equality of outcome, this socialist utopian backdrop that we've let creep into our way of thinking, which is fine as like an aspirational sort of afterthought, I guess. But if you try to apply it practically, it just falls apart every time. All right, let me jump to 2 other issues that you both have as your top 3 separately, but 2 issues that are near and dear to me. So Matthew, I'm gonna stick with you because I consider myself highly environmental. And I don't think we are in a crisis, but I think to deny some of the things that are going on is to abandon the requirement that has been put upon us to be good stewards of our earth. And for me, because I care about the environment, when I hear the government is going to try and take care of it, I start to get scared because that's the single worst thing that could possibly happen in my mind. I'm very curious to hear what areas of environmentalism concern you and what you would do to address it.
It's a great question. It's a very great question. How should libertarians go about this issue? If for anyone who believes one of 2 things, which is one that there is some level of climate change happening that is, even if you want to like disregard the arguments, like is it man-made or not? It's if it's happening, it's happening. For somebody to genuinely believe that, or if somebody has heard the Pascal Gambit, I think it's called, where its original form is about religion, but it can be applied to environmentalism too. If it's kind of Schrodinger's cat. If you don't know if for certain if there really is environmental climate change happening or if there isn't, if there's just not enough, if you just feel like you're not informed enough, you don't know if it's severe or if it's not happening whatsoever or if it's somewhere in the middle, then it would be better to prepare for it as if it was real than if it wasn't. Because if you prepare for it and it's not real, oops. If you prepare for it and it is real, well, you just saved the earth. So I've always felt like very compelled by that argument to make with people. And as a matter of fact, 76% of the people in my district, which, but also people north of my district as well, in that number, believe in climate change. And I think by that math, that must mean that probably most libertarians, probably nearly all people on the left, and then quite a few people on the right even, I agree with this. And to get a little, to digress just very shortly, I feel like often when I see talk with other libertarians, I'm a little distressed that I often hear more on the deep skepticism side. And I get, of course, that government intervention in environmentalism, we should be very skeptical about that. But sometimes, or more often than I'm comfortable with, that's coupled with, and it's because climate change is completely false. Or they don't say that, but it's that mentality. Mm-hmm. And I respect different opinions because, truthfully, I learned quite about this kind of stuff briefly in college, but ever since then I haven't really kept up very scrupulously about the details and stuff. So, and in fact, I've been wrong once or twice, and in my journey to learn more. I apologize. I haven't really answered your question yet. I just figured that was an interesting thing.
I like the background. It's good. It's good for people to hear.
Mm-hmm. And so oftentimes when people hear environmentalism, these days especially, they think of the Green New Deal. I want to say I do not support the Green New Deal. That thing is a disaster, and people should be hinted into that in the way that it's named after the FDR's deal. No offense to Mike Mayott's gold deal. Might share the same name, but that one's actually pretty great from what I know. Yeah. But anyway, so there's all kinds of ways to go about environmentalism. And I must think the reason podcasts that I listen to, where they've talked about this, as well as I think the Cato Institute has talked about it somewhat, have suggested very important things. I have quite a lot of environmental ideas written down because it kind of takes a little while to really explain that capitalism can provide for a lot of ways for environmentalism, and it's not like dead in the water just because you're a capitalist. We can end the monopoly that Duke Energy has on distribution of energy. That would save cost and allow for more innovation, for one thing. We can have an idea I had is to have an award for innovation in energy and environmentalism, to encourage research and development without subsidizing it, which to me is an important difference. And I will admit, like, a award program is like a Nobel Prize of sorts, is not going to do much, but it's something. Luckily, really fighting for a capitalist approach to conservation. I really feel, and also I must thank the Wild Caucus within the Libertarian Party for helping inspire this, that there are different ways you can run a park, for example, that can, or ways that a private business or my preference, a nonprofit can run such a thing. And I feel, with that in mind, that the government could try to have a very business tycoon but nonprofit means of approaching, say, the many parks that populate a huge percentage of the land in our state, that they would preserve different species and plant life, but then not cost money to run, because they would have clever business ways of allowing people to enter for free, but then to charge people to fund the park. And I was thinking in the shower today actually that it reminds me. This sounds awful, but hear me out. It reminds me of mobile phone games where so many of them these days are free to play, but they have methods that for a small segment of the user base will pay money. It tends to be a lot of money. It's like an exponential curve, going from like most people pay nothing, a few people pay a little bit, and then there's like an even fewer number of people pay a lot, and they willingly do so. They have no problem with it. Although in the case of mobile games, they might be addicted because of shady tactics, but that's not really going to be the case in the environment. You go out into nature, you're like, I had a wonderful time. You're never going to say I was addicted to nature. I'm in something equivalent to Alcoholics Anonymous. And so those are very capitalist ways of doing things. I will admit I have some policies that are a little more left wing, or bigger government. I'm afraid to say, like I am interested in EV pilot programs that are very small and for, as pilots do, kind of test the waters, and can be after the fact examined as an experiment to see what was the effect. Was it worthwhile? Can we learn anything from it? Was it a good idea? For example, in Durham, Roy Cooper initiated a very small handful of school buses will be electric vehicles, which and a lot of people were mad about this for all kinds of reasons, and some of them were legitimate. But I felt like the example some people gave of like, oh well, they're gonna not working if it gets cold, just like it happened in Chicago in the worst of winter, or that it's gonna the kids are not going to be able to get to school because they'll stop halfway there because they run out of battery. And those two particular claims are completely bogus from the research that I've done. To get into one of them as to so you see that I'm not making that up. For example, with the Chicago thing, it's like Chicago is way colder. First of all, we're living in the South, and secondly,
I live there. That's why I moved here.
And secondly, if in the way that this pilot program is like a small percentage is EV, no one said that you have to replace all of the school buses with EVs. Having options is nice. It means you can hedge your bets. You don't have to put all your eggs in a basket. Which reminds me, my policy on sources of energy, that like we're better off when we have lots of them. That and instead of like the left wing who tend to be very hateful, very disinterested, I'll say to be kind, of like anything from coal to natural gases to like all of that stuff, like petroleum, I guess. You have a very deep like skepticism and wanting to get rid of it quickly. But also, weirdly, oftentimes nuclear. Libertarians tend to love nuclear, me especially. Whereas I'm very open to innovation, lack of regulation, to an extent. Of course, we need safety. I wouldn't ever advocate for like a nuclear power plant that's so deregulated that it goes off. But they don't anymore. That's such a big misconception.
Gen 3 and Gen 4 are safer than.
Because innovation has happened, and it has made nuclear power like so much better. We don't even know because we're still using very old nuclear power plants. They're more dangerous than the ones that we want to build but can't build because we're not pro-enterprise here as much as we ought to be. Which is something I think libertarians can help us do is to embrace innovations and improvements that is so hard to do when there's so much red tape and so forth. But the long story short, I do think we need to have a lot of different like energy sources and openness to that, and to trust that, as has happened throughout the last 100 or more years, that the bad non-renewable things are going to naturally fade away because equal support is higher than ever. That because the culture moved, not because the government did things. The government tends to respond to things. It has a hard time catching up with people sometimes. And so I'm confident that these things will go away on their own. Me more than most libertarians, I'm okay with pushing it a teeny bit, like to help along culture, just a teeny bit, but nowhere near as much as the left wing does.
So a lot to unpack there. I like your innovation award idea. I hadn't thought of that, but it ties into the education thing too, because we are so overburdened with regulation is maybe imprecise, but the bureaucracy that comes with the regulation, that we've stifled innovation. And so you don't see some of these advances that we saw for so many years. So I don't publicly debate climate change anymore because I find it useless. What I would say instead is that it's a no-brainer, and that the things that we can do to combat climate change from the perspective of those who advocate for combating climate change are also advantageous to those who wouldn't be in that position. So like you said, nuclear power, instantly, just tons of very, very clean energy, less pollution, better for everyone around.
Mhm.
Uh, I'm a big, like, solar and wind farms are not good, but I'd love to see solar panels on every house that could have one. And that gets you off the grid. You're not putting money back into Duke, who has a monopoly. And then you talk about safety, but we just have energy companies that buy regulators. So Duke can spill thousands of tons of coal ash into the river and pay some nominal fine and get off because they bought off a regulator. So we're not,
Hmm.
it's a
Suing
joke.
is important. Sorry
Yeah,
to
yeah,
interrupt, but
liability. They're just protected from liability.
which is wrong, totally wrong. I'm totally against that.
So sticking with the wild theme, but Chris, jumping to you, I also cannot believe that someone could go to jail for smoking pot in their basement, but Beth Woods, for example, can get a DUI and just kind of get away with it, but we still want to. So we were, if I'm not mistaken, the first state to make a step to decriminalize marijuana in the 70s, and we have never changed our laws at the state level since. Why are people so resistant to it?
Mhm.
So yeah, on the marijuana question. So anything under a half ounce is a $200 maximum fine and misdemeanor, and then going up from there, depending on how much it has, you can do jail time. I think anything over half an ounce, you can go to jail, which is still usually a personal stash. Lots of
That's
people,
not that much.
yeah, lots of people buy more than half ounce at a time. So, but the way the system's set up, we just got medical marijuana bill out of committee because they would
CARES
kill it.
Act, right? Yeah.
Yeah, they would kill it in committee every time. Now it finally got out of committee, passed the Senate, had the votes to pass the House, and then Tim Moore came up with some rule, and I'm guessing it's the actual rule, but said because the majority of Republicans didn't support it, even though the majority of the House did, that he didn't have to bring it to a vote. So he just killed it on a procedural.
He's a terrible person.
Hmm.
Yeah, and then the actual recreational, I don't think it's gone anywhere. I don't think it's got out of committee or anything. I know there's 2 bills that have been presented for recreational, but there's been no movement on them whatsoever.
Well, Cherokee is legalizing it, and 2 Republicans from North Carolina are trying to sponsor a bill in Congress to reinforce federal marijuana laws at the state level. They want to impose their morality on you and tell you how to live. The Republicans as the small government party is the biggest joke.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. They're not small government. Even when it comes to spending, they talk a good game, but they never actually cut government, especially at the federal level. You look at the spending bills that have come out of the Republican House we have right now. There's no cutting. They're not for small government. It's just them forcing their way on you. Instead of the Democrats' priorities, it's the Republicans' priorities, but they all want to tell you how to live your life.
That's what they love to do. My way is better. You better do it. It's so good that we have to put you in jail if you don't listen to it. So let's talk federal for a minute. And I try to not dwell on this because we're here to fix North Carolina from the ground up, but some of the stuff at the top level really can affect us. And there were a number of Democrats and a number of Republicans from North Carolina who voted at Congress to reauthorize FISA, but to allow the amendment to get rid of even a warrant requirement for Americans who are being targeted. One Wanted to get your all's thoughts on that latest one and what you might want to do differently to push back on federal overreach into our state.
Christopher, would you like to go first?
Yeah. So sure, we need to enforce the 10th Amendment as much as possible. I don't know enough about like digital surveillance that how we could stop it as a state. You know, we could refuse to arrest people, stuff like that, you know, come up from not having a warrant. But if it's the federal authorities kicking in somebody's door and they're the ones that, you know, were surveilling them, I don't know what we can do as a state. I'm open to ideas. You know, I'd love to do, you know, some nullification just on that. I'm not sure. You know, I'm open to anything though.
Matthew, any thoughts?
I was reading about this in preparation, but also because it was in the news recently. I saw it on Twitter, I definitely agree that there should be a warrant for if we're going to keep FISA, because I feel like that's very fundamental to the Constitution. But as for FISA itself, that it took its kind of modern form, I believe, in 2008, and you can correct me if that's not quite right.
2009, something like that.
And kind of a delayed response to the 9/11 and the wars that happened. It's a tricky subject because indeed, I suppose terrorism could theoretically come back at any time. So it's not so much that it's not as relevant per se, but then again, maybe it really should never have been passed in the first, well, or at least taken on its modern form.
I'm with you. I would never have allowed any of it. So
yeah, so you know, not to say that terrorism is not an issue or that it's not important to any of us, but just that it would come at the expense of American citizens is really sad to me. And it often is so easily, like they find loopholes and they break what I think is such an important aspect of a person's rights and their privacy. It's something that maybe doesn't get talked about enough, just how much it means to people and how because people we've kind of resigned ourselves to the idea of like there is no privacy anywhere. Alexa listens to us like every minute, every day. Your phone probably listens to you, and so forth. But which is why I respect people who are just like get off the grid. That seems hard, but to be like a non-digital monk, but to each their own. It probably gives them a lot of peace of mind, but that's such a drastic thing. It goes to show how meaningful that is to have their privacy. And I feel the federal government just doesn't respect that. And there are entire agencies that don't respect that.
Their entire job is to not respect that.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting point. So you are significantly more likely to die at the wrong end of a police shooting, even if you're innocent, than you are in a terrorist attack. But we can't get body cam footage released half the time in North Carolina, and cops have qualified immunity. And I can be harsh on cops, and I always like to qualify it that it's not an anti-cop stance. It's a recognition of the power that the state gives cops, and then a state's refusal to hold that power accountable. It has nothing to do with the cop itself, except that that's the office that person's holding. I get very frustrated with the federal government's overreach because they say it's to protect you. You know, this is to stop terrorism or fentanyl or blah, blah. And then they show up and arrest, you know, somebody that doesn't agree with them politically, or they're knocking at people's doors for Facebook posts. And it's like, you know what? You all have created this polarization. You've made half of America hate the other half and vice versa. And then you're surprised when they're acting on it. So actually, Chris, I'm wondering if you, being in the military, have any color to add to that. I'm always amazed, and I've done entire episodes with people who are in the military on how liberty-minded people coming out of the military are. And I've also made the statement that joining the military is perhaps the single most noble job a person can undertake. Because when you're going in, you don't know what it's really about. You're just willing to lay your life down for the country. And that's why I always say thank you for your service. But then what my understanding is, you get in and your eyes are sort of open to it's not all peaches and cream.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of liberty-minded people in the military. I think that's what a lot of them join. They think, hey, I'm going to go defend freedom, and then you don't. I mean, a lot of it has nothing to do with defending our freedom. You know, you could say Afghanistan, but we should have left there after a month. And I think most veterans agree, you know, we shouldn't have stayed there after we, you know, threw the Taliban out, after we killed bin Laden. We shouldn't have been in Iraq. And then they don't declare war, you know, they're weasels, you know. And I sat there, and I believe I was sitting in Afghanistan while I was watching the news, and don't know which politician it was at the time, but they're complaining about the war and how it's going. And they said, well, I voted to give George Bush this authorization. I just didn't think he would use it like this. It's like, well, if you would have done your job and either declared war or not declared war, you know, you wouldn't be in this issue. But they don't want to do their job. They don't want to declare war. They want to do a pass to the president. So that's kind of my rant on the Congress doing their job. And yeah, I think there's a lot of libertarians can target veterans because they've seen kind of the bureaucracy of the government and everything that goes with it. And a lot of them are, you know, want to see better.
And they're willing to fight for freedom.
Oh, absolutely. You know, they're fighting for freedom. They're fighting to defend their country. What they don't want to do is, you know, go nation building or, you know, whatever
The
else.
opposite of freedom, if you ask me.
Yeah, a nation building or, you know, going to war for the defense contractors so they can make money.
You know, I lived in China for a couple years, and in a lot of ways, like, it's nowhere near as bad as we're told here. Like, it's definitely a boogeyman, but in terms of the censorship and the loss of the ability to have some degree of individuality, it's much worse than we can imagine. Like, it's very hard for Americans to put themselves in a situation where you have no freedom of speech. Not really. Everything is suspect. But we hear politicians say things about China, and then China's dropped exactly 0 bombs in the last 25 years, and we've dropped something like 40 a day on average for 25 years straight on people around the world. And we have it in Yemen and in Afghanistan. And like, what's the meme going around right now where they're showing Israel and Palestine shooting at each other, and on one side it says your taxes, and then the other side it says somehow also your taxes? But we talk about that as a federal issue, and I do think there are things we can do in North Carolina to support our efforts towards peace. And it doesn't have to be some big, broad, like all these people that are out lobbying now for city councils to make declarations about the Israel-Palestine conflict. I personally think it's ridiculous. Like Israel and Palestine are gonna be like, oh, well, the Raleigh City Council made this declaration, we better stop fighting. But things like defend the guard. So our National Guard in North Carolina will not go to a foreign country unless there's a declaration of war. Or demanding from our Congress people, if you're gonna bomb somebody, declare war and then hold yourself accountable for that declaration, for that vote, not this surreptitious proxy war, kill hundreds of thousands of children, but like, oh, but it's not our fault.
Yeah, I would absolutely support defend the guard. I haven't looked a lot into it, but just on principle, if Congress hasn't declared war, that's in the Constitution. You know, we shouldn't be going to war. We shouldn't be bombing people. We shouldn't be deploying troops. The only justification I can think of, if for some reason we need to do a, you know, first strike on somebody, which we shouldn't be doing anyway. Everything should be defensive. But, you know, but once that's over, immediately it needs to go to the vote and declare war. And if Congress isn't willing to do that, then North Carolina shouldn't be supporting them.
100%. And I've actually thought about this. The only situation where I could potentially see a first strike being justified is if we had a team that was not in the offensive, that was surrounded by a hostile force unexpectedly, and we had to do something to extract them from the situation. And even then, it would be a first strike, but it's kind of a defensive first strike to move them out of harm's way.
Well said.
So I want to be respectful of time. I got 2 more questions for you. So first, I want to ask each of you about your strategy and your campaign. So Matthew, let's start. What is your strategy? What are you looking at in terms of opposition? What are your goals, and how can people help?
Great questions. Very important when it comes to getting elected, of course, and doing things. So I try to have the approach of, I really want people to know that I am perfectly serious about this, which is not to say that I expect to win, of course, but that I am. So in other words, I'm realistic, but I at the same time, I take this very seriously, and I try my best to be the statesman that I would want to be, so that if somehow I found myself elected, that I'd be completely ready for it, and that I would do a good job, and that I can demonstrate it ahead of time, and in this crucial time when voters are listening. So part of my strategy has been to talk about kind of like free marketing kind of stuff, or like my presence. Well, presence is part of it, to be honest. The incumbent, whose name is a Representative Dahl, doesn't really do anything at all for the most part. I know that she has updated her website ever so slightly. And in addition to that, she held an event, I think the day after the primary election, where she went onto a green field and had like a podium to speak at, and people sat in the grass. They didn't even have chairs in the picture anyway. And so I don't know if that's how it went down. I didn't see like footage, but in other words, what I mean to say is that she has been basically doing nothing. She's not on Twitter. She's not on Facebook these days. She has these things, but she hasn't used them since December. She
opposed last time, if I remember correctly. There is a Republican this time, but I will say watch for her to do more stuff now, because the Democrats are big on their ground game because they want Biden to win. They think we're a battleground. I don't actually. Not for the president. The governor will be interesting, but yeah. Sorry, keep going. Yes,
Sure.
Your seating is in line with expectations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can understand that point of view. I know that, for example, when Trump went through the primary, he didn't join the debates, and there's a certain argument, a certain Machiavellian kind of argument there, that like from that point of view, you might actually do more damage than help if you were to actively do things. That if you do nothing at all, perhaps that's your best option, which is really sad, because that's looking at things in a Machiavellian, how can I win? Not how can I be a good public servant? How can I do a good deed through this thing that I'm doing with my life? How can I learn by talking to the voters and other such stuff? So I focus on those things of being very present. I'm on Twitter almost daily, which good and bad, I suppose. But the point is that I'm always reachable. I try to be approachable, and that, like, I've spoken to Republicans, Democrats. I kind of sort of talk to Green Party people, and Libertarians as well. And so, like, I want to give the impression that, like, I'm here for everybody. I'm not here for one faction of my district. Though I have strong opinions and values that are the foundation for how I decide things and all. That I nevertheless, I don't want the people to feel left out like they do sometimes by Republicans and Democrats. And so,
Chris, what's your strategy? What's your opponent? What's your landscape looking like?
So the landscape, I have a Republican incumbent. Johnson County's pretty conservative, so I think he's pretty safe. My strategy is kind of the long game. I'll just keep running as long as there's not a better libertarian to represent this district. So hopefully I get my name out there. People see me on the ballot this time, and then 2 years from now, they, do a little more research into me and see that I'm the better candidate. And the way I feel is, especially when you're talking presidential politics, but even getting down local, most people don't like the Democrats and Republicans. They vote against somebody instead of for somebody. And, I've read studies that have looked at like the smallest, world's smallest political quiz and other political quizzes like that. And there's only about 15% of people that truly believe, the left, and about 15% that truly believe on the right, then about the same amount that believe in libertarian values, and pretty much everybody else is in the center. And what I would say for these people in the center is, hey, we won't agree on everything, but look at what the Democrats stand for, look at what the Republicans stand for, and then look what I stand for, because I believe even though we don't agree on everything, we're going to agree on a lot more than, the Democrats and Republicans.
I agree completely. And we also, one of the things that I always feel like we fail to make aware or apparent in our messaging is that we're actually really not trying to tell you to do either or a third or any other way. Like, do whatever you want to do. Just don't force others to do it. So you want to be real liberal? That's awesome. Form a commune. That I'd probably, in a free world, I'd probably fall into that. Like, I could live on a beach and eat fruit and I'd be just fine with it. Especially if it was fermented. But we don't want to force anyone to do anything. It's this desperate battle of, like, you hear from both of the parties, the other side is evil. They're always evil. They're always evil. But what did they do that was evil? Are they actually out there, like, murdering 6 million Jews or causing a great famine where 80 million Chinese peasants die? Those, I don't know exactly what evil is, but to me, that's evil. Not like being misguided in how you want to raise your children. That's just a mistake. And if we allow the free market to handle those sorts of things, those mistakes will quickly be weeded out because there won't be government payment to prop them up because someone's trying to gain power for it. So last question, I'll stick with you, Chris. Oh, go ahead. You got something on that?
Oh yeah, I totally agree on living your life. Because I'm probably more conservative in my personal life, but when it comes to the government, I'm about as liberal as they can get. I just think the government should be totally out of our lives, and that's kind of what brought me to the Libertarian Party. Is I lean Democrat because I was more concentrated on the social issues, but they really spoke a good game, but weren't about the social issues. So that's why I got into the Libertarian Party, because they let people live their life. Well, me personally, I live my life a little more conservative. I don't want to tell anybody else, what they can do with their body or, how they can spend their money.
Between you and your God.
Yeah, exactly. I don't like abortion, but I'm not going to tell somebody what to do with their body. I don't gamble a lot, but if you want to go to a casino, that's your right. Do what you want with your money, do what you want with your body.
So you actually alluded to my last question. And let's stick with you there, Chris. So tell the voters a little about you as a person. Who is Chris?
So lived in North Carolina about 20 years now, Johnson County about 5. Been married to my beautiful wife, Grace, for 16 years now. We have 4 children. I work at Pike Electric and love fishing and the outdoors.
All right. And what about you, Matthew?
Well, I really, really love video games, so much so that I started a company to be a video game developer.
I was actually carefully, I was going to see if you brought it up, but I'll talk video games for a while, so I was being careful. But I got to ask, what are you playing right now?
Let me think. I'm playing a game called The Outer Worlds, I believe. And it's about it's kind of like Fallout for those who know what that is, but it's like um
Wasn't very good on Amazon the first episode, by the way. I've heard good things, but I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to two.
I've been meaning to watch that. I'm a really big fan of Fallout. I'd love to see if it's good or not. I'm excited to at least give it a try. But The Outer Worlds is interesting because it is a more political game than most I play, and than most games in general. I won't get into it too much, but it's interesting that it commentates on, say, like end of the 19th century kind of Gilded Age kind of capitalism and that kind of America. Like, what if that was in space? And so it's interesting to find myself on the other end of the political opinion of the developers who are like, Gilded Age capitalism bad, and I'm like, okay, I'll be the bad guy then, because like they're actually kind of like low key right about a few things. But it's also kind of tongue in cheek because that is kind of the evil route to a real extent, to a little bit. But that's kind of a fun thing about.
Exploitation's never okay, but exploitation is bad no matter who's doing it. I think it's a necessary outcome of people motivated by power, regardless of where they are. To assign that to enterprise or government in and of itself, I think is false. But with government, the goal is power, so then exploitation becomes a de facto side effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, me personally, the idea of like company money, and like you can't and it's I mean, like the way that I was taught about it in high school kind of made it sound like a dystopia. But there's a lot to like about that era. I actually read a book about the presidency of Grover Cleveland. I won't get into too much of that, but it was very much in defense of him as a surprisingly libertarian figure, despite him being very forgotten at the time. And one of the things he did was he actually saved the economy from what would have been a really bad recession by teaming up with J.P. Morgan, I think it was, to ask them to give a lot of gold coins to the government to stop inflation from happening, oddly enough, because like silver was worth less. It's a really convoluted thing, but basically somehow increasing the gold supply meant that money retained its value. And just the idea that the Grover basically saved the economy. He tried to get Congress to do their job, but they wouldn't. Through working with like this mega capitalist bajillionaire at the time, is an interesting thing to learn in history, because it certainly counters the socialist idea that like, oh, the richest among us are the most evil and we need to get rid of them at all costs. It just flies in the face of that belief. So learning history is very, very interesting, and that's also part of who I am. I'd say is that I love history podcasts. I love old history, new history, American world.
I like to tie in bringing the video games all the way back to who you are. I am I'm playing Metro Exodus right now. So I just finished Cyberpunk 2077, which I know I was late, but I was happy I played it without any of the bugs, and it's a pretty beautiful game. But like I said, don't want to go down that rabbit hole. So real quick, Matthew, plugs. Where can people go to support you? Where can they follow you? What are your websites? And I'll put them up on the screen too, but people listening.
Sure. Okay, so interesting timing. I'm working on getting my donation web page up at the moment, and I think probably by the time this is uploaded, it will exist. It'll probably maybe be in the show notes, the description, but if not, I'll leave a comment.
Twitter or anything?
Yes. So I do have a Twitter, and it is, my handle is Kordon for Liberty, 4 being the number. I have a Facebook of the same name, although I'm told that's for some reason Facebook is having a hiccup where it's hard to get to my site. Very bad luck there. But you can get to it from my Twitter. I know that for a fact. And then this is a bit unorthodox because I'm going to have a website up very soon, that too. But at the moment I don't. So the next best thing is I'm on Ballotpedia. You can read up a lot about me, my background, my opinions, all kinds of stuff on Ballotpedia. You just type in my first and last name, Matthew Kordon, as it is on the screen. and you can read as much or as little about me as you want. I like that they have like their survey. Each question is like closed. So it's like if a question really interests you, you can open it up and see my response. So it's quite similar to what a website would be. And it teaches you more about like, who am I running against? What are my monetary cash flow, if you really care about that sort of thing. And also, if you see something weird on there, just for the people in my district, send me an email or message me on Twitter. My private messages are actually open to everybody, because I love transparency. I love talking to people. So if there's any reason you want to talk to me, if it's like, do you really care about a certain issue? You want to tell me your life story? You want to tell me you hate one of my policies, whatever it is. I love to listen and to think about what people have to say. I love civic engagement.
Excellent. Imagine that, a government that wants to hear from its people. And what about you, Chris? What are your plugs?
Yeah. So I have a page up on the state website. You can go to the candidates and Chris Sessions. I also have Facebook Sessions for NC Senate and X Chris Sessions for NC Senate.
So I will put both of your handles up on the screen and in the notes, and I will repost it on Twitter and Facebook with all of this. Gentlemen, thank you so much, not just for joining and for talking, but for running. We need more people entering the Liberty movement. I appreciate it. The party appreciates it. People of North Carolina appreciate it. I'm looking forward to seeing what you can do and forward to getting you back on. Have a wonderful evening.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, everybody. It's Dub and Groo. We're back. And April showers bring May flowers. And it looks like it also caused you to remove your mustache and your hair. Where'd they go,
Yeah,
man?
it's starting to get warmer, no matter what people say, and a little bit more muggier and more humid. And and whereas for some people it's sun's out, guns out, mine is sun's out, hair's gone.
Right?
So
I was really enjoying that mustache. You had a really good one going, man.
yeah, I know, but it was just time for something different, and
Your
also
girlfriend wanted you to cut it,
it
huh?
yeah, and it's a change of season, and something we've got to talk about. Speaking of change of season, it was the end of 2 seasons this past weekend for both the women's and the men's tournaments. Both ended, to me, in the same exact way. The team that had been dominating all season was the team that ended up winning the championship in both cases. Because while Purdue was doing great, it was the same philosophy that South Carolina did against Caitlin Clark in the Iowa game. That was some of the best defense I've ever seen played in the women's game, especially to just shut her down. I've never seen anybody get on Caitlin Clark like Johnson did. It was a defensive masterclass. And I don't care whether it's men's team, women's team, girls, boys, whatever. You want to learn how to play defense, do exactly what South Carolina did, and you will win basketball game more often than not.
I'm happy for them. I am.
Yeah, and I appreciated Dawn Staley giving her flowers to Caitlin Clark in her post-game speech after she was given the trophy, and I thought that was extremely classy of her to do so, because it was the highest watched women's game in 5 years. It outdrew the men, and
Isn't that amazing? That's never happened.
No, well, yeah, it's becoming like that, but it's going to be a great time for women's basketball because it's not going to be the last time we see her this year. Because Monday is the WNBA draft, and then May 4th is the opening day for the WNBA. So, and the Indiana Fever is going to be on national television 26 out of 30 appearances. So that just tells you the influence that Caitlin Clark's not only going to have on college basketball, but now professional women's basketball as well. So
Yeah.
we'll see how she does. I'm excited to see what's going to happen. And then, of course, in other basketball news, staying there, the Charlotte Hornets announced that Steve Clifford resigned his position as head coach, and they're already starting their head coach search.
Do you think that's a good move?
Well, it could have been that the new ownership group is trying to put their mark on the team because they were very active at the trade deadline. They're in a very unique position. They could be going out to get a bigger name coach, or they could be going out to get the hottest coach in the G League, which happens to be a woman. But they also have an opportunity if they decide to get one of these bigger name coaches to pair him up with a good general manager, sort of like what the Panthers did, and maybe we'll have two teams whose trajectories are showing up, and maybe we can get the teams in Charlotte turned around.
Yeah,
So
that'd be good.
it
How
would
about
be.
the Wolf Pack? Both of them make it in making it to the Final Four. It's never happened.
No, they've done something that previously only UConn had done before, getting both the men and the women in the Final Four. And unfortunately, they couldn't do what UConn did a few years ago when Kemba Walker went on that magical run, and then the women won the women's NCAAs, and they did the double dip that way. But you know, they've built a good women's program there at NC State. And what is going to be interesting is the ACC editions of, Stanford, Cal, and SMU next year is going to create quite the jockeying for the top four positions of women's basketball in the ACC. Because you already have Notre Dame, who's very good. You're going to still have State. Carolina's on the rise. Carol Lawson's doing a great job over at Duke. And now you're letting Stanford. Yes, they've lost Tara Vanderveer because she announced her retirement. But Stanford still is going to have one of the best centers in America in Irifian, because she may attempt next year, because I've seen video of her practicing. She can dunk. So she might attempt that in the game, which, in the women's game, that is not attempted very often. So only a few people in history have ever done it. So,
Funny to watch.
Yeah. So, and besides, we're going to have women's basketball was left in good hands. You have Juju Watkins, out there at USC. They'll be going into the Big Ten next year. So the Big Ten will be not losing a lot of viewership, and Iowa announced that they will retire Caitlin Clark's number 22. No lady will ever wear number 22 in the University of Iowa ever again, because she did more for that school than anyone before or since.
Yeah, so tell me if you noticed this. I think ever since they've legalized sports betting in North Carolina, I've noticed people paying attention to more random games and random sports that they have otherwise not paid attention to. Like, I saw more attention on the women's basketball Final Four than I've ever seen and even the finals here in North Carolina. And I really believe it's because people are paying attention because they have some dollars thrown into it.
Well, that's part of it, but also if you just happen to look at the games, it's good basketball being
It
played.
is good basketball.
And it's something that I've said before, and it's not just with the women, but I've seen, especially with the men, that NIL has been a godsend for the players
Tremendously.
because you're starting to see a trend now in NCAA athletics of it coming full circle. Whereas many years ago, students did stay in school 3 and 4 years. It was seen as a good thing before they would jump to the NBA or the NFL. And then all of a sudden, when these leagues started letting people come early, they were only coming to school maybe 1 or 2 years and then jumping ship. And now it's lucrative to stay in school now that they can actually earn money on their own, that they don't have to jump. And leave when they want to. That's why you saw, Baycott, and there's talk that RJ Davis might come back for his 5th year for COVID next year and not necessarily go in the NBA draft. And if he came back, of course, it would be talked about. He would be preseason player of the year again in the Atlantic Coast Conference. So, it's a different world now.
In college, no big deal, right?
Yeah, but now things are getting a little dicey now that legalized betting is everywhere. Because I don't want to mention the player's name in Toronto because, of course, it's still an active investigation. But if he is found liable, then he will be kicked out of the NBA forever. Because apparently some unusual bets were made on him, particularly achieving the under in his points production. So if he was shaving points off his own performance and intentionally missing shots, missing free throws, whatever, and there were unusual bets being made on the under coming in from unusual sources. And people are like, well, this is part of the problem with having sports betting everywhere. No, this is a good thing. This is what's going to stop people from betting on themselves and keep the games on the up and up, because a player is going to be that foolish and jeopardize his career over making extra money. Yeah, it's idiotic. Why would you want to do that? You've seen what's happened to Pete Rose. You've seen what's happened to all these college kids that betted. It's really dumb.
Yeah, it'll backfire.
So
that's fraud, and it doesn't ever work well.
Mm-mm.
Yeah, it might get them some temporary money, but in the long run, their career will be ended if cheating or fraud is involved. But let's switch over to our beloved Canes, who have clinched the playoffs.
Yes, and
they're on their way to catching up on their points to New York Rangers. I think they're
they're catching up, but the Rangers aren't doing any favors by losing. And unfortunately, it looks like the Carolina Hurricanes are going to be solidly in the second place spot in the Metropolitan Conference, which means they will start the playoffs in third, playing the third place team, which is most likely going to be the New York Islanders. Now, there's an outside chance that it could be Pittsburgh if Pittsburgh gets in, or if for some reason Carolina loses out and drops to third. It's just weird, but it's highly unlikely. Right now,
Washington is now above Pittsburgh.
Right, and it's a jockeying for that last playoff position. But one of those two are going to fall out of the playoffs, which is going to be unthinkable. Those two stalwarts have been playoff teams for a good, decade and a half. And
Yeah.
speaking of almost a decade and a half, unfortunately, the poor Buffalo Sabres have now gone into uncharted territory. 13 years of not qualifying for the NHL playoffs.
Yeah.
And anyone like us who have lived through the doldrum years like we did, when the Hurricanes weren't drawing anybody, weren't competitive, finished in the bottom 5 of the standings every year, and didn't spend worth 2 cents in the cap. It's such a different world now that we have an owner that wants to spend to the cap, wants to make deals, wants to sign people.
Good money.
Yeah. And here's one more Hurricane stat that I think you'll find interesting. They sold out every single game this season.
That's amazing.
And, as I've told people before, North Carolina and the South is a different beast.
Mm-hmm.
We're not going to go support something that's not good. You wouldn't go pay money to go see a bad movie, would you? Why am I going to pay, $65, $75, sometimes upwards of $100 to go watch a sporting event?
Right.
If what I'm going to see is going to be a home team loss, and a loss by a lot,
no chance of making it to the playoffs.
Yeah.
Stanley
Why
Cup.
would I do that? Why am I going to waste my money? Why am I going to waste my gasoline to go watch this team?
Yeah.
But a team that wins, that's something I want to go see. That's a ticket I want. That's something I want to take my family to. That's something I want to take a friend to,
Are you saying
watch
that
this.
in the Northeast or the northern teams, they go whether they're losing or winning? Are you saying that they'll pay money for a losing team other than the South? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, you see it with Buffalo. It makes no sense to me. I mean, you're starting to see it now.
Yeah.
Their sellout streak ended, and Buffalo people, I think, are smart sports fans, but they're not going to go and pay the prices the Pagulas, who own the team, want them to pay
I don't think it's
to
a Southern
watch a
thing.
constant loser.
I don't think it's a Southern thing then. I think it's
No, but I've seen more where people up north, it's like, I hear people complain, especially in Toronto, how the tickets are so expensive, but they sell out every night, no matter how good or bad that team does too.
I admire that. I admire true fans instead of jumping on a bandwagon. When they're doing good, you support them. When they're doing bad, you stop supporting them. I mean, either you're a fan or you're not. And
Right.
There are
but you got to know that those single game tickets are usually bought up by the casuals.
Fans are going to show up, and they're not intermediate fair weather fans, is what I'm saying. I admire that. I think that's great.
Right. And I'm one of those people. I went during the doldrum years. I will always tell people the night that somehow I scored penalty box seats, basically 2 rows behind the penalty box in the lower bowl for $60 against the Florida Panthers.
Nice.
That's not going to happen now, because people were just giving tickets away back then.
Yeah.
And
you could get them for $35 easy, $35-$40.
Yeah, especially if it was a weeknight game,
Yeah, behind the goal, $50. Those days are over.
A Tuesday night game in February would be going for $50, and you could sit right behind the coach or the opposing coach or behind the penalty box and
the Thrashers game. You could go for literally $30 and sit lower level and watch Atlanta Thrashers.
Yeah,
and
have you heard this, that they are trying to put another team in Atlanta?
Oh boy, which one?
Yeah, but here's the other news that I just found out today, and this one actually has traction. The Coyotes to Salt Lake City, Utah.
No. You serious? Is that going to happen?
It sounds exactly like how the Thrashers moved to Winnipeg. There were all these rumors. The rumors had feet. The NHL kept denying, and then all of a sudden one day Gary Bettman shows up in Winnipeg, Canada, at a press conference saying, "Hey, we've got an agreement with True North Sports and Entertainment. The Thrashers are coming to Winnipeg," and it sounds exactly like that again. And yeah, and the thing is that
struggle to keep a fan base for hockey, and I don't understand it.
Well, Utah
It was true.
Utah has a fan base.
Okay.
They would sell out Utah Grizzlies games. There was a time when the Utah Grizzlies were out drawing the Utah Jazz when the Jazz were really bad. After both Stockton and Malone died. Or not died, but retired, excuse me. And the old owner passed away, is what I meant to say. And the new owner that bought them is gung-ho on growing Salt Lake City sports. They have the Utah Jazz, they have Real Salt Lake in MLS. And the other day he was putting out on his Twitter feed, what should a new name for the Utah NHL franchise be? And asking the fans to vote. I mean, does that sound like a guy?
That sounds like a move to me.
That's going to get a hockey team? I think it does because they have the infrastructure in Utah, and I think the NHL is tired of playing out of an 8,500 seat college arena.
Yeah.
At Arizona State, at the Mullet Arena. I mean, it's not a bad arena, but it was designed for a college team. It wasn't designed for a professional franchise.
Right. That's a little low attendance, 8,000.
Yeah, and even though the owners of the Coyotes have tried their best to secure land to build a new arena, the NHL wants something that's more, ready, because they would play at the Maverick Center, which used to be called the Delta Center, where the Jazz play, because that seats, like 14,000 for hockey, which is almost double the attendance in Arizona. And besides, you wouldn't have to worry about changing conferences. You wouldn't have to worry about changing divisions because you're in the same time zone.
Yeah.
And so that would be great for Utah. I feel sorry for the Coyote fans that are out there, but it's just, the NHL is going to go where they can sell season tickets.
There's people that still pull for Winnipeg Jets just because they were ex-Atlanta Thrashers. So before the
that's true too.
Some kind of shoes. Tell us about these shoes that you.
Well, if nobody's gone to see it, Kevin Keats, the head coach of NC State, got some brand new shoes from Adidas. Of course, the colorway is white with red Adidas stripes and NC State colors. But going around the side of the heel, he has 9 ice cream cones, and those stood for the 9, quote, road wins that they had, winning the ACC championship and then winning 4 games to get to the Final Four.
Isn't that funny? They use ice cream cones.
And the flavor of these ice cream cones are in the main school colors of the 9 teams he beat. So yes, there's a Carolina blue cone, there's a Duke blue cone, there's a Virginia orange cone. It's so funny. There's a yellow Marquette cone. So it's really cute. It's fun. And of course, the thing I'm going to say about that is NC State has to parlay this success into ACC consistency during the regular season. These fun runs in the ACC tournament are great, but I know State fans have been desperate for a consistent winner since the end of the Jimmy V era.
You're not
And
wrong.
and getting these tournament runs or NCAA tournament berths, once every decade or 15 years, just it can't cut it anymore. They just want a team that's competitive. They just don't want a team that just makes it into the tournament. They want a team that can make Sweet 16s and Elite Eights and Final Fours
Every year. Yeah.
every year. They want to be up there with the Carolinas, and they want to be up there with the Dukes. And, a lot of teams have passed them over the years. I mean, even Miami's gone to a Final Four. So, this is what the state fans have been yearning for, and I'm happy for them, actually.
Very.
Because they've been loyal. Now, you want to talk about loyal fans. A state fan is a loyal fan. I've got to give them full credit.
Right.
Because they've been through a lot.
Raleigh
So,
was on fire all last week. It was absolutely insane around here. But
and I want to ask you a question. You live in that area.
I would have thought Purdue would have came a little closer to UConn. I really thought it was going to be a tighter game.
Well,
game.
It was the same.
Good. And I actually thought Purdue could beat UConn.
Yeah, I did too.
I really did.
I had a couple dollars on Purdue just because I think I had him at plus 205, which was just too nice not to put a few dollars on.
Yeah.
I didn't bet any money line. I only bet money line instead of the spread, because I really thought Purdue would beat them outright.
I did too.
But I will say that game was very similar to the women's game. They let Zach Edey get his, but Connecticut was just so deep. And, they just come at you in waves.
Yeah.
And they can score 5 to 8 points in a drop of a hat. And before you know it, you're down. And you're like, how did I go down? I was within 2 points. How did I go down 10 points?
Yeah, no, I agree. They're nasty.
And the thing is, even if they get Zach Edey to get his, if they make him give hook shots further away from the basket, he might claim 1 or 2 of them, and then they get the rebound, and then they're off and running.
Well, there's a reason why both teams were #1 seeds. I mean,
they proved it.
not so
Absolutely
ironic that they both ended up in the finals.
Yeah, and no disrespect to Purdue, but they really proved a lot of people wrong after doing what they did last year. They almost pulled a Virginia, losing to a 16 one year and then winning the whole thing the next. But getting to a national final is not bad either.
No.
So
Zach Edey is an alien. I've really come to believe that he's a alien or some sort of reptilian or something. That dude is just absolutely not human.
Something I did learn about Zach Edey that I felt sorry for him. He is a Canadian citizen and therefore ineligible for any NIL funds in the United States.
Oh,
so he cannot. He's one of the few NCAA players that can actually use NIL to benefit from it. So he's one that actually stayed in school to try and win a championship of some type, a conference championship, a national championship, something. So I'm sure he'll be picked in the NBA draft.
Oh, he's already got contracts on the table, so probably several.
Oh yeah. So, but he just has to graduate first, so he can get that sweet, sweet money.
I'm sure he'll make the right decision. So let's wrap up here. Any closing words? Anything?
No, it was a fun season for college basketball, but now we get to look at the NBA playoffs.
Yeah.
Of course, we've still got Charlotte FC playing, so it's another summer of soccer. And before we leave, I got to shout out the women's national team who won the She Believes Cup in a shootout against Canada. So another summer of soccer coming up. But also the Stanley Cup playoffs. Let's not forget. The Canes futures I saw this morning have dropped to plus 300. They were around 700 about a week ago. So money is coming in on the Canes, not just from North Carolina.
Oh yeah.
So, but anyway, it's been a wonderful, wonderful time. I hope everybody gets out there and has a wonderful week.
Yes. Have a wonderful week. And thank you for sticking around to the best part of this podcast. And
Absolutely.
look forward to talking to you next time.
Yep. And everybody just have a good one. All right.
Yep.
Y'all take care.
This is Dub and Groo signing off. We'll talk to you later.